Five, four, three, two, one. Welcome, Sean Luke from
Thank you,
SPMB
Jim.
to the podcast. Good to see you. Although we've been on a lot of calls together I think we've been on a lot of Zooms together this year.
Correct.
Yeah, I think how many searches have we done with you guys? I think this year alone is at least two, maybe
I think
three.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
going on three or four now in total. That's right.
Well, welcome. So, yeah, this has been a long time coming. Um, I think your team's done a great job finding us engineering leaders. So, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about the firm, kind of how you got where you are, and you've also got an interesting background. So maybe we can start with the firm and then you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Well, I'm really glad to be here. Appreciate you taking the time. So again, Sean Luke here. I'm a partner at SPMB Executive Search. For those of you not familiar with us, we are a mid-sized retained executive search firm. So we are headquartered out of the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, although we have offices in New York, Denver, and Los Angeles. So we are nationwide. We're a mid-sized firm. We're roughly 60 people or so. We are tech focused, so we work across the tech ecosystem, everything from more traditional infrastructure like cybersecurity, storage, compute, et cetera, through all types of software to consumer tech, deep tech, physical AI, robotics, et cetera, and everything in between. As a firm, we do all functions as well. So we do all types of functional searches, go to market, CEO, CHRO, product and engineering, et cetera. I personally focus on our technical leadership practice here. So that's two main pillars. It's engineering leadership and product leadership. Some derivatives thereof, like VP of AI and data science and whatnot. But I effectively lead that practice for our firm, and we work with all stages of companies. I would say that probably three-fourths of our clients are either venture-backed or PE-backed companies at various stages. We do some public company work as well, but yeah, that's my background. I'm based here in Silicon Valley, just outside of San Jose, in a town called Los Gatos, which is where Netflix is headquartered, to put it on the map. And um,
I had
and
good
yeah,
friends that
we have
live in
a
Los
yeah.
Gatos. Los
There
Gatos
you
was
go.
one of those, 90s communities where my friend bought some like $400,000 house that didn't even have a basement on a slab in Los Gatos and sold it 2 years later for like $3 million. At the time, I was like, "You're
That is the
insane.
way of the valley. That's right.
You're insane for paying that price." And then he's like, "Okay, I was wrong. I just didn't understand the market." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's that's true of a lot of the Bay Area, but yeah, it's a great community. But great proximity to a number of the large tech juggernauts here in the valley.
Well, plus you
So
can get to Santa Cruz because you're, sort of halfway through the mountains already at that. All you got to do is a windy
correct.
road to get you to Santa Cruz at that point. We had a
That's right.
portfolio company there, so there was nothing worse than picking up your rental car at SFO and trying to drive to Santa Cruz at like 11 o'clock at night when your
Yeah,
brain's still on East Coast time. There's nothing good about it.
that's right. That's
So,
right.
so talk a little bit about you have an interesting background. How did you get to tech recruiting from where you started out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get that. I get that question quite a bit, actually. I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in Marin County. I went to UC Davis, University of California, Davis. I was actually a biological sciences major there, and in fact, I went into the school with the intention of going either pre med or pre veterinary. Davis is well known for its sciences program.
Well, and
Um,
also wine, that's like that is the, if you're, I think, vinologist or whatever, like UC Davis is like the
that's
world
right.
leader in grape production. Yeah.
Yeah, viticulture and enology. In fact, Mondavi donated a bunch of money to UC Davis because of that, because Davis had funded him earlier on
Oh, neat.
when he was
Yeah.
trying to get started. And interestingly, a lot of brewers, a lot of brewmasters in California did some time at Davis. Um, but I went to school up there. I'd always had an analytical mind and real sort of keen interest in how things worked, biological systems, biological mechanisms. So again, I was pre-med, pre-veterinary, fulfilled all those requirements. I'd say about two-thirds of the way through, maybe even sooner, maybe about halfway through, I realized that even compared to some of my classmates on a similar path, I just had really strong people skills. I had good instincts for reading people, what their intentions were, what made them tick. And as a result of that, I just became more and more interested in business. Started taking business courses at Davis to complement my science degree, picked up a managerial economics minor. And when I graduated, it was just around the year 2000. It was the tail end of the first kind of tech and dot-com boom, soon to become a bust. And I was fascinated by Silicon Valley and everything going on. So I found our firm at the time. It was Schweikler Associates. I was attracted to the firm in general, the people, number of youngish partners in their late 20s, early 30s, very hungry. And we had some real history in the Valley. Lee Schweikler, who was the S in SPMB, actually placed John Morgridge as the first CEO of Cisco, and placed Dan Warmenhoven at Network Appliance, and had some other big placements. So there was kind of a rich history there, and sort of fell into it and fell in love with it, and the rest is history. So like, not a conventional path, but that's true of a lot of people in search actually.
Yeah, I think yes, a lot of people in tech too. We get a lot of, when we talk about engineering leagues, we get a lot of music majors, and there's a high correlation with math and music skills, and we get a lot. I mean,
Yeah,
I was an applied statistics accounting major, Sean. So
there you go.
yeah, the only thing I could do was accurately calculate to five decimal positions my odds of getting a job. So it was like 0.00000001 kind of thing. So, but now, of course, I would just call myself a data scientist, and that would be just perfect.
I was going to say, yeah, you'd probably be on the right path now, but a lot of different tracks you could have taken that.
Yeah. So, what's interesting. So I want to talk specifically about engineering and product because we're in a very interesting time, with both of those careers. I mean, for us, I would say what's interesting is, and I know other firms you work with, hiring technical people is a very specific skill. Now I know everybody says,
Hmm.
oh, everyone is different, but technical people, it's quite different because there's a lot of, unlike a medical field where if you're looking for a heart surgeon, they either have a degree in and they've done their residency or they didn't, whereas in tech, you get a lot of weird backgrounds. There's not like a lot of certifications, that kind of thing that anybody really cares about. So it becomes and for us, I would say that, finding a firm that we can work with that sort of understands our type of people, even though you know, all our CTOs are different, the guys you place all have a similar, like their drive level, kind of, what they're interested in working on. Like, I think that's one of the challenges with trying using a different search firm for every search is I don't know how they get to know the personality of the firm, right? Because,
Hmm.
I mean, you've met me, I'm a wackadoo. So, at least you understand I'm a wackadoo. So you introduce me to candidates that are okay that this guy's a wackadoo. So that's kind of
I have
helpful.
to set their expectations. That's right.
Yes, yeah, but I think that's one of the things we found is that you can do it like I mean, I don't think anybody, even men, get their hair cut by somebody different every time. That's just madness, but so you stick to one. But I think this is a case where you do have to find firms and teams like yourself that understand our kind of folks, because I think since we started, I would say we've seen better and better candidate roles with each of the searches. I don't know if you think the same thing, but we seem to find really good candidates faster, because I think you guys sort of know what we're looking for. And even though there's different, small different things with each one of them, you kind of know the character. Would you say that's largely true? I feel like it's largely true. So
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think with any client that we work with, in the first couple of projects, there's a bit of a sort of a calibration phase. Even beyond that specific project, there's some calibration that goes into just sort of understanding what types of leaders resonate with the firm, and how they think about talent within their portfolio companies, and what they care about the most, because every client has slightly different preferences and different priorities in these
yeah,
hires. But I do think there's a lot to be, I think that hiring in general is difficult. I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's amazing how many people, senior people in technology, get it wrong. They tend to look at candidates through the wrong filters. And I think, product and engineering can be particularly difficult for folks who are not technical by background, engineering specifically, of course. And I think like with any role, it's a lot of pattern recognition. It's looking for success. It's looking for consistent themes in one's career. It's trying to assess that cultural fit. Don't let it turn into a beauty contest, right? Find the candidate who's a good fit, assess for those skills, and really focus on the right things versus the best interviewer. I think that's something that a lot of companies fall into a trap of, is they're disorganized in their interview process. They don't really go in with planned questions and topics they want to address, or you have various people asking the same questions over and over again. And then, people come out and say, I just didn't really feel it with that person, but they can't really articulate why. And I think, it's you have to have a plan going into these hires, and it's not about tricking the candidate or finding the candidate who's the best interviewer or asks that, or answers the questions most succinctly. That's part of it. but it's about finding someone who, can point to past experiences and anecdotes that map very closely to what you're looking for, in my opinion. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think compared to other C-suite or senior manager positions at companies, tech interviews are the hardest to a large degree because um, a lot of them aren't good interviewers. And
yep,
that's why we do the panel interviews and we do questions and we hand the candidate questions in advance so I mean, we're not trying to quiz you. A lot of times I think in the Google interview kind of style of, if we were traveling in a car at the speed of light and we turned the lights on, would they do anything? Like, it usually isn't really relevant for our senior managers. You know what I mean?
yep,
I think it is a fit. It's a fit and conversation. It's, I mean, you and I have talked about this. I've given you a hard no on candidates just from your review that you've suggested I talk to, and then I begrudgingly talk to them. I'm like, yeah, Sean was right about that. Like, yeah, and that's that filter. I'm like, look at their resume. I'm like, yeah, didn't see myself in that, right? I think that's half the problem. And you have your own bias as an engineering manager, and the reality is,
yep.
yeah, we're just wrong. So I think that's part of the challenge here. I think is we've seen having technical people be part of the conversation, maybe even ones that are part of the company. I mean, that's part of what I do in the why I'm on the interview process is that's part of my job, right? But you have a recruiter that really understands the tech and understands the people is pretty important because again, plenty of these I look at and be like, I don't even know why we're talking to this guy, right? But then
Yeah, and I think
talk to me,
a
great.
really good search firm, and a good search partner. If you're working with a senior search partner who knows what they're doing, they will truly operate as a partner and as a peer to the client, right? And of course, at the end of the day, the client's the client. But at the same time, we work best. Our firm, myself in particular, we work best with clients who treat us as a partner, as a peer. They listen to our input. Doesn't mean we're going to get it right every time, but peer executive teams don't get it right every time. They clash. They, agree to disagree on certain topics, and so, we spend a lot of time with these candidates. We really try to go deep and understand the fit and have a number of good, thoughtful reasons as to why someone's a fit. And so, yeah, we're not afraid to tell our clients, listen, you know, talk to this person, check them out. There are reasons why they could be a good fit. So I appreciate that. And I think that's part of developing that relationship. When you find a good search firm, stick with it. I can go through other things to think about in selecting a search firm. I think the problem is in today's day and age, um, so many private equity firms and venture firms, for example, have talent partners. And these talent partners, God bless them, but a lot of them, they're mostly interested in, hey, how many searches have you done exactly like this one in the past year? And they get hung up on that instead of thinking about, boy, that last search we did with that firm was really tough, and it was no one really knew what we were looking for, but they figured it out. At the end of the day, you want to find someone who is, search is about hunting, right? It's not about pushing resumes around or moving candidates around. It's about going out into the market and finding the best fit for your particular hire. And that requires a thoughtful approach. And I think, people forget that, right? So, I think building that relationship with a search firm, making it turnkey is really critical. So,
Yeah, and it's funny because one of my hot buttons is that every email, solicitation email I get starts with, "Hey, we'd love to partner with Parker Gale." It's like, okay, stop. Let's just agree. The first thing you're going to do is sell me something, or I'm going to hire you to do something. And if it starts to work, yeah, I think partnership's a great idea. But these guys want to go in with this, hey, we want to be your partner. And it's like, guys, it simply doesn't work, in our
yeah,
world, although they think it does, which I think is really one of the challenges in our segment of the market for sure. And I also think though that it does take a couple of searches to kind of get in the groove with the teams. Now you've seen me with several of the deal partners because one was a Ryan deal, one was a Devon deal, but I'm the consistent link when we're hiring, C-suite guys. Below it, I think where the PE firms are probably right is if you can have an in-house talent manager that's helping coordinate the searches at the next level down. Like, we don't get involved in, frontline software developers. We don't get involved in like the pod manager, so, typically you'll see in an engineering team, sort of one manager or director with, six people under them, like, kind of what they call the pizza box kind of size,
yep,
I find dumb because, if you think that seven people can share one pizza, you're insane. First of all, the flavor. it'll be one slice of meat, one slice of, it'd be a disaster. But that's
Yeah.
that I just small pause. We don't get involved in that. So hey, if you want to have a talent person that's helping coordinate that stuff for funding, great. But we talk to you guys at this, we're hiring the top head of engineering typically,
Mhm.
or the next level down. I mean, we definitely separate CTOs from VPs of engineering, which you and I have talked about before, and we've done podcasts about this too, that it's, CTOs typically are solving science problems. They may be the best visionary presenter. VPs of engineering keep the trains moving on time. And those are
Yep.
often two different jobs. And
Mhm.
that's well, a lot of times what we're trying to split up. So we're in an interesting spot in the market. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, so right now in the market, um, finding heads of engineering, I'm going to guess that every firm that hires you is saying AI first stuff. Would you say that that's true? Like, what are your trends right now in terms of product and engineering managers that are looking? What are the PE guys asking for that seems a little ridiculous, like us?
Yeah, I think in general you're right. I mean, AI is clearly it's front and center in every conversation that I have with existing clients as well as companies interested in launching a search. And yeah, it's a bit different on obviously the engineering or technical side and the product side, sort of different
Yeah,
use cases for AI, if you will, within those. Um, what I would say about that, so when it comes to, so first off, there's sort of two roles that we're seeing in the market right now, right? You've got your more, for the sake of this conversation, let's call it the more traditional VP of engineering or head of engineering. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But then you also have companies that are now looking for that head of AI, that VP of, in some cases, they might call it VP of analytics and AI ML engineering. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But when it comes to let's start with the VP of engineering, the more head of engineering, traditional engineering leadership role. There are no real AI experts in that role per se. And, now the
thank
exception
you.
might be there were people in the past, let's say, who were folks that came out of, let's say, some of the early search platform companies, right? So people that were building internet search platforms, recommendation personalization engines and technologies. A lot of those folks did have deep backgrounds in applied ML, for example. And this was maybe like 15 to 20 years ago. I used to do a lot of work with a subsidiary of Amazon that built all their search technology, and there were some amazing people in ML engineering there, and at companies like PayPal and whatnot. But
But
again, that was more
that's an important
applied ML.
differentiator though, Sean, because I think everybody calls AI, when they say AI today, I think most pedestrians are going to believe that that is, chat GPT, and large language models. And large language
Right.
models are a piece of AI. There's
Correct.
neural networks, machine learning. So this is funny because I think when somebody hears you say, well, they were doing this 15 years ago, they're like, no, they weren't. LLMs really
Right.
just came
Right.
along. Yeah, they were. We've had
No, they
portfolio
were.
companies doing
They
that.
were.
Yeah. Case-based
Yeah,
reasoning and lots of different.
that's right. These folks grew up, and a lot of them grew up in data science or whatnot, and they studied ML, machine learning, and they were kind of the OGs of AI. I mean, a lot of them joke that we were doing AI before AI was called AI, right? So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right about that. So fast forwarding to today, um, and any engineering leader worth their salt is now doing something in AI. So what do I mean by that? So what you want to look for, I think, with a head of engineering is a couple of things. You want to look for specific examples of how they're leveraging AI internally within their own organizations and their teams today for somewhat simple use cases, things like
In
automating,
engineering, Sean, or in operations, or both?
well, a little bit of both, right?
Okay.
So it might be like using AI to automate code generation or code reviews or even some elements of QA. Um, but then also that's kind of one aspect of it. They might be deploying agents and building frameworks that can be used by others within the organization as well, pretty readily, right? So engineering leaders who are coming up to speed on AI, the best ones are spending time in their free time at nights, weekends, kind of dabbling in AI, educating themselves on it, getting accustomed to it. But really, they are finding ways to leverage AI internally to automate both operations as well as engineering processes and systems and whatnot. The other thing that they're doing is they're collaborating closely with the product side to try to incorporate AI enabled features into customer facing products as well, right? So how do we do that? How do we use some of the AI technologies out there to to build products that serve our customers' needs more and more? So in my opinion, that's what you should be looking for with a head of engineering is someone who can speak to very pragmatic ways they're leveraging AI today to impact the business, drive efficiency, drive optimization, et cetera, et cetera. You're not going to find an AI expert and a VP of engineering rolled into one, right?
Yeah, I agree with
Now, the
that.
flip side of that is this other role that I alluded to, that we call it the head of AI or head of analytics and AI ML engineering. Those individuals, the searches I've worked on there are typically more the ones that maybe they grew up in data science or data engineering. They've been working in that realm for a long time, and their role coming into various organizations is to come in, and they're not necessarily data scientists. They're not necessarily developing models, but they're coming in now and they're sort of building the AI discipline, the organization. They're building the platforms, the frameworks. They're building sort of an AP or building an AI layer and platform, if you will, that let's say all engineering teams within the broader company can build on top of to build agents and whatnot and deploy those throughout the company. So they're kind of building like the underlying AI infrastructure and technology to help the company really sort of accelerate their AI efforts. And that's a separate role in my opinion. If you try to mash those two together, you're not going to find that person. If you do, you're just going to dilute their efforts on one side or another. So in my opinion, those are two different hires, and that's what we're finding with most of our clients now.
Yeah, it's harder on our size companies because we often can't afford that, right? So first of all,
Correct.
anybody's got AI in their title and has any experience, and I completely agree. There are very few gurus, especially when it's applied in production stuff, because this is relatively new making use
Yeah,
of.
we're all learning together to some
Yeah,
degree. Yep.
and we still don't know what the cost basis is going to be on any of this stuff because Anthropic and OpenAI. I mean, they're still losing money hand over fist, right?
Yep.
And right now in the Microsofts and the Googles, they're all losing money on their AI solutions too. But of course, they've got two big monopolies to fund that, which the startups don't. So it's still relatively new. So again, when I see a stupid when I see like a job listing and it's like 10 years of AI experience, with LLMs, like, okay,
No, that's right.
you're
That's
not going
right.
to find it, but good luck.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
and I think this is one. This is interesting because I've been through other markets before. When client server came along, I mean, you could argue relational database is one of the first things where that was relatively new. They couldn't when relational databases in the 70s couldn't really handle transaction volumes, and then by the late 80s and early 90s, the Ingresses, the Oracles, they could handle pretty large scale systems. I mean, most of SAP was delivered on either the Oracle database or when they bought Sybase, the Sybase database. So, real systems could be built on. So that was a huge inflection point in the industry. Client server was one, browser-based applications were one, mobile was one. I think Web3 was basically, malarkey, along with the blockchain. Like, I get it.
Yep.
It's a useful academics exercise, but yeah, we
Yeah.
were all, but AI is I think it's the first one. We've always had customers that might be interested in the early days of like, yeah, I'll try client server, if you're ready, but they weren't really ready for it. Same thing with, browser based, like, yeah, it looks cool, but I'm still pretty comfortable with my client server application, or I don't really need to be on mobile. When mobile came along, there was a lot of interest in it, but not like this. Like we have customers literally
Yeah.
they have their hand out that say, I want to buy something that has AI in it. And they almost don't care in your product.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think that makes it hard because, um, there isn't like years of experience with these folks. Even your data science guys, they've got tons of background in analyzing data, probably cleaning data, but not used to how to use these models. So I think we're all learning, which I think is one of the challenges. Like in our world, translating for CEOs or translating from the board, that there's something here. And I love the spot we're in with it. I would not want to be building my own large LLM because, like, man, I want to compete with those guys. But on the other hand,
Right.
products that we pick today may be out of business tomorrow because
Yep.
there's a million startups around this ecosystem that's going to collapse into itself as a natural, same thing happened to every other industry, right? They collapse down
That's
to a
right.
relatively small number of these things. So, you're assuming there'll be
Yep.
three or four big LLM, winners, but around it, all the tooling and everything else is who knows? So for us,
There's going to be a ton of consolidation. I think that's right. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's now. I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen this in our portfolio that our product managers, for the first time, with things like V0 or Lovable, if you're familiar with either of those, they're kind of
Hmm.
AI-based, low-code environments. They can literally build working prototypes to show to
Yep.
customers, which has been great because
Yep.
that's always been one of the challenges between engineering and product is product coming back and explaining it at enough level of detail that engineering doesn't code themselves into a corner.
Right.
We're
Right.
just thinks to understand it, but don't understand. This is kind of a great loop. So we're in a really interesting time, but I think, you know, it's got to be hard. Do you find that people are looking at moving right now on the development side, whether product managers or engineers, or do you think the whole economy thing has caused people to pause? The whole AI thing is causing people to pause?
Actually, I found the opposite to some degree. I mean, it feels like people are definitely open more than ever, perhaps. Well, I shouldn't say more than ever, but it does feel like people are receptive to having discussions about interesting opportunities, right? I think that even you've seen all the news, and even within large companies, no one feels completely secure anymore. Um, in the venture world, you've got some issues there just with sort of liquidity and valuations continuing to skyrocket. There's a little bit of a FOMO effect where these, because of fear of missing out on some of these deals, getting in on these deals, the valuations are just skyrocketing and the term sheets are getting kind of wild. And so, um, people are not viewing any one particular place as a safe harbor. They're open minded. They're open to having conversations. If you have a good opportunity to present to them, they are open to having that conversation. And I would say private equity in particular is interesting. A lot of folks who maybe spent years past in venture backed companies have recognized that in private equity, you're typically working in a company that has been, not always, but for the most part, more kind of fiscally responsible, more oriented around profitability and cost optimization and whatnot. There's just a higher likelihood of a successful exit, right? I mean, I think
Yep.
that most candidates have recognized that, yeah, if you're going to join a private equity backed company, you're there to see an exit in 3, 4, 5 years whenever you join. Um, it's not a shoot the moon type of deal for them. They're not going to, sail off into the sunset as a result of that exit, but they're also not going to spend 5 years of their lives working 70 hours a week with nothing to show for it at the same time as is sometimes the case in a venture backed company. I do find that, not to digress a little bit, but candidates,
Hey,
it's
hey,
it's
our,
interesting.
our
So
our podcast is all about digressions,
there
Sean.
you go.
Silly
There you go.
rabbit, segues are for kids,
That's good. That's good. I found that some candidates. It's interesting. You do find these candidates who have these philosophical convictions about PE versus VC. Like some candidates love private equity. It's like they just love that model. They love that little bit of, I don't want to oversimplify it and call it rinse and repeat, but there's a little bit more predictability there in terms of what the job is, what
Oh
they need
yeah.
to do. Some people on the venture side are like, oh, those guys they're just focused on cutting costs and less on innovation, and I love innovation. So you do have camps of people who don't cross pollinate as much, but there are people who will move back and forth. And I do caution my PE clients, don't just assume that someone who's only got venture experience isn't a good fit. A lot of venture backed companies have become very responsible with cost and whatnot. And um, people who work in venture backed environments, they are hands on, they are scrappy, they're innovators. A lot of those skills can be very, very useful in a private equity backed environment. Of course, CTO is different from VP of engineering in many of these cases, but there is a lot of there's a lot of value at looking at people from those backgrounds as well, in my opinion. Public company is kind of a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
When you hire for a public company, you're looking for someone typically who's operated at that kind of scale before, and that's kind of its own bucket. Although there's nuances there as well. But
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
some quick thoughts on those camps.
yeah, I mean, we find a little bit, Sean, on the opposite end too, that folks who have worked for, myself included, of course, folks who have worked for a big tech company for a lot of years. It is challenging for them to drop down to PE or venture because
Correct.
they're just managed differently. And we've had plenty of you hire even on the sales side, you hire a rep from Oracle, and yeah. the first day, like, hey, where is all the Gartner research? Like we had a global license at Oracle for Gartner. I'm like, yeah, we don't have a license at this company for Gartner. We can't afford
Hmm.
it. $50,000
Hmm.
a year for Gartner is too expensive for what we get out of it. So sometimes the guys who scale down from a much bigger company, they're just not used to the lack of resources. Like, you get a lot of freedom. It's not as much politics, but there aren't the resources, the bevy of resources that you would have had at a larger company. So we see that challenge too, which is why it's hard to find, candidates that really do fit, right?
Yeah, historically, it's very rare that not just myself, but others in my firm have placed a candidate in a private company who only has large company experience, right? It's just you just don't sleep well at night having made one of those placements because you're just not sure if the transplant is going to take, so to speak. I think, in any search I do, the best candidates, in my opinion, and some of the recent placements we've made working with you guys, I think, are a good example of this. But that balance of having worked in a larger organization where they've seen operations at scale, they've seen best practices, like a company like Amazon. There's a lot to
Sure.
learn at a company like that. But then they've worked in earlier stage environments. Maybe they've even been an entrepreneur, a co-founder themselves. I actually, when I look at resumes, I don't mind seeing a failure here and there in the background. I think individuals who've taken risks in the past or co-founded a company, maybe they built a great product, but it wasn't commercially successful. I view that as a plus versus a negative, right?
Yeah.
Because they sort of learned some hard lessons on someone else's dime, right? So they can bring that experience into the new company, new organization. But we look for that kind of variety of experiences because I think it shows dynamism and versatility and flexibility in the individual, which I think is what you need. Some companies, some CEOs, clients get really enamored with kind of name brand companies on resumes and whatnot. You
Yeah.
got to be really careful of that because some of the best people don't come out of the sexiest companies, frankly, right? And that's an important one of the important takeaways that I advise people when they're thinking about making a hire. So
Yeah.
um,
And again, it's, the exceptions prove the rule. Certainly there are some exceptions but yeah, I'm with you on from a hunting ground standpoint, it's a
yeah,
different market. It's not the moonshot as a venture, but it's not the massive resources and slow pace and a lot of politics that you get out of large companies. It's a different
yeah,
fit for sure.
I think that's right. And going back to your earlier point, though, so yes, you can attract, you can get candidates to talk. One of the things our firm, I earlier in my career, we only worked with fairly small venture-backed startups in the early days, in the early 2000s. And so we were regularly pitching companies and opportunities that no one had ever heard of, right? I mean, we're talking about,
Yes.
hey, this company has no revenue. They've got a couple of VCs. And remember, back then, a Series A round in those days was maybe like 3 to 5 million if
Yep.
you were lucky, right? So not a ton of runway. And so I learned it at a very young age in my career and how to just pitch opportunities in ways, how to map that opportunity to a candidate's background, get them excited about the potential. And so I think in general, good search firms can do that, right? They don't, anyone can pitch an opportunity at, I don't know, take your pick, right? At OpenAI, but pitching, an opportunity at a company, convincing an executive to move into something that's much riskier, that's a whole different skill set required to do that. Now they will, if you're good at that, these candidates will take your call. They will entertain it. I think on the client side, the market is heating up. We've noticed that just in the last month or so, after a very quiet summer, things have started to pick up in terms of inbound companies pinging us saying, "Hey, we're thinking about kicking off a search. What does your capacity look like, et
Yep.
cetera?" So it is getting more competitive. So as we move forward into the new year, it's going to get more competitive for talent. I think on the client side, it's important that you're selling every step of the way. When you have a candidate in the interview process, you're not just screening them, you're selling them, you're getting them excited about the opportunity. And I think having someone in the firm, I think at Parker Gale, I think Ryan's very good at doing this, is as you get toward the later stages in the process of just laying out potential financial upside for the candidate in doing that
Yep.
deal, right? Doing the opportunity. What does the equity look like under different the baseball analogy? If we hit a single, double, triple home run, what does it look like for the candidate, right? And just being able to be really crisp in how you articulate that to candidates. But yeah, it certainly can be done. It's throughout all the ups and downs we've had over the last 15 years. you've still been able to get candidates to talk, right? There's never been a period where candidates just won't talk to you. I just think technology in general is just
Yep,
it's
too
too
much.
fluid. It's too dynamic, right? So,
I mean,
um,
it's funny. We've had, literally at companies we've sold, we've had employees. Yeah, I know one in particular. We'll save the names to protect the innocent. Got $1 million check at our office, and she was not a super high level. She was just an early person in the firm and pitched in. And
yeah,
she didn't even know she had stock, and she cried. I mean, she literally cried, and she
yeah,
said, "This is, puts my kids through college. Like you're not going to become a." Private jet millionaire in PE as a at least at our size. But
yeah.
there's real value in these companies. Like it's not a
Oh yeah,
moonshot, but it's not it's generally not a zero. Which I think is a good thing.
absolutely. Yeah, no question.
So let me hit you with some in the old games was the speed round. Would this be the speed round? I don't know, or Joker's Wild. You pull the handle, Joker, Joker, and a triple. I'll take potpourri, Sean, for $300. Um, So there's three things that kind of the summary here, right? So what is the biggest misconception that you think your customers have when you're talking about hiring a you know chief product officer or chief technical officer or VP of product? Like what's the misconception either in kind of what the right background is or what people think they should be doing? If we misunderstand hiring those kind of folks, where are those mistakes made? Do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to engineering, I would say, in my opinion, based on my experience, with engineering leadership, domain expertise, specific domain or industry expertise, in my opinion, is not as important, provided that the tech stack experience is relevant, right? So either the tech experience itself or you're looking for someone who's integrated a number of acquisitions or they've driven something through tech transformation or whatever it may be. Those tend to be the more interesting components. And I would say that, it's important to think about how these different leaders are motivated. Engineering leaders are motivated by working on really interesting, challenging, kind of bleeding edge technology initiatives and whatnot. They really do want to geek out on the technology, want to get
Yep.
excited about what it is they're building. Now, the best ones, of course, always have the business top of mind, and they're able to articulate the business goals and the priorities to the team. But they love it. They just love the technology. So I guess on the engineering side, think creatively about where your person might be sitting. Don't get fixated on any one category or segment or whatnot. The other thing about engineering leaders too is just remember that just because engineering leaders have different personalities more so than any other function. I think when you hire a VP of sales, for the most part, you know what you're getting from a personality standpoint. Engineering leaders can be all over the map. I've had engineering folks who are as charismatic as a Fortune 500 CEO, and I've had ones who are like almost like Milton down in the basement and office space, right? And I think
I'm gonna need my
um,
stapler. I'm gonna need my stapler back, Sean.
exactly. So I always tell people too, just because someone has a softer personality doesn't make them ineffective as a leader. In fact, I would argue with rank and file engineers, they might be more credible, and they may lead through example and through technical prowess and whatnot. So don't over rotate on things like that. On the product side, product is a little bit different. I would venture to say that product individuals, domain expertise is important for two reasons. Number one, as a product leader, they're going to be theoretically setting the roadmap and the product strategy and the vision. So that's important. Number two, product people are motivated by passion for the space,
Hmm.
frankly, for what is the use case, what is the problem we're trying to solve. I mean, that's what gets people out of bed in the morning with product folks. So I do think that domain expertise when it comes to product leaders is quite important. I also prefer product leaders who, frankly, grew up with technical backgrounds, right? And it's not one size fits all. I've placed product people who grew up more on the customer facing or sales and marketing side of things. Depending on your product, if you have a company that has a pretty deeply technical product, I do think that having someone who maybe spent a couple of years in engineering, or is just technical enough to have credibility working with their engineering counterpart, particularly with all the stuff going on in AI and
Sure.
how AI is being incorporated into roadmaps, that's going to be critical as well. So those are a couple. Not sure if those are those are a couple of takeaways. I'm not sure if those are surprising necessarily, but I think those are themes that I would kind of hammer
Yeah,
on
yeah,
there.
no, I mean, I agree with you that we sometimes we see senior management teams getting hung up on domain expertise, which can be somewhat difficult. I've even had, by the way, really successful engineers that come from a different stack and no market experience, right? But there's good architects and good managers of teams, and they've done fine. So I agree with you on the product side because for two reasons. One, our best product managers are most comfortable talking to customers like nonstop. Like they love it. Like they don't care if they
Yep.
get negative feedback, whatever. Those are the best ones because they're bringing back okay, this is what the customer's saying. And I know the famous Steve Jobs quotes, customers don't know what they want till I give it to them. Okay. To me, that's like jackassery. I get it. Yeah. But
A little bit of hubris in that, yeah,
yeah,
for
well,
sure. It
yeah,
worked.
because
It worked for him, but it's not going to
yeah,
work for 99.9% of the population.
no, and
So
I mean, he's famously said it, around the original iPod. It's like you didn't invent MP3, you didn't invent the first MP3
that's right.
player. I think you did a great
Just
job
made it better.
aesthetically. You just made it better,
Yeah,
but let's not,
yeah,
and I think you made it better by talking to customers who were like, "Ooh, I don't like this or I don't like that," right? I think at the end of the day, our best product managers do a great job of that, right? And if they have the ability to translate back to engineering, that's super helpful, no doubt
yeah,
about it. So.
yeah.
Let me ask you two final questions. I always say the best one for last because we always want to hear like some crazy placement story. Just like the CEOs were all laughing after I had the surgery. My teeth started falling out, and they started falling out at the first road trip, Sean, after my surgery. I was speaking to all of our CEOs, and they knocked my teeth loose with the ventilator, which I didn't know, and they didn't realize, and they literally started falling falling out at this meeting, which was yeah. They still remember we did a great Sea Island event. And they're like, hey, remember your tooth fell out, last month? I'm like, yeah, I don't need to be reminded of that. I look like a jack-o'-lantern by the end of the thing. Anyway, so that's the final question. But what advice would you give like CTOs or chief product officers or people who want to move from where they are into a PE-backed portfolio company or to try and go to a portfolio firm? Like what advice would you give if if that's your goal and your vision, you kind of want to feel like you're part of something like that? You know, how would a typical CTO or CPO prep themselves for being a good candidate for somebody like us or even some somewhat bigger guys?
Yeah, I think great question. I mean, I would say that the most important thing is, at least in terms of articulating their background and their experiences, is being prepared, being ready to speak to how um, their efforts, the changes they made, the initiatives, the transformations, whatever it was they did, what was the direct measurable impact on the business, right? You'd be amazed how many candidates I talk to who have excellent backgrounds, great experience, and they fall down on that front, right? When that question comes up, it's like they can't. Yeah, we had metrics, we did this and that, but they're just not able to. It's almost like it's not organized in their minds. They're not able to,
Yeah.
to clearly state, "Hey, I did A, B, and C, and the result was this." We could measure lift in the business and cost savings here. And so I think just getting really crisp around, as a CTO or a VP of engineering or as chief product officer, um, how you always had the business in mind, how you mapped business goals and direction and priorities into the technical roadmap or your processes, and how you articulated that to the team underneath you to kind of rally them and move them in the right direction. It's a very simple thing, but I think a lot of folks just kind of fall down on that front, right? I mean, the way to think about it is if you got pulled into a board meeting at the last minute with the CEO, and you're in front of the board and they're asking about what you've done that's moved the needle, you have to be prepared to answer that question,
Yeah.
right? I think that's critical. That's just maybe a preparation thing, um, or you need to do more of kind of measuring those efforts. And then it goes without saying, get up to speed on not just AI technology, but also just data infrastructure technology in general. Just experience with platforms that are ingesting massive amounts of data. I mean, it seems like no matter where you work, whatever sector you work in these days, whether it's healthcare, energy, consumer tech, even physical devices, hardware that are ingesting massive amounts of data. That sort of experience with data platforms and data technology, and how to monetize data, how to build products based on that data. That's becoming more and more important than ever. So, a couple of thoughts
Yeah,
there.
that's interesting. I think the, other back to your firch point, which is a really good one. Um, I think some of the time when you're hiring people from a larger company, like when I worked at Oracle, right, there are like 8 product managers for every product. And there's like
Correct.
product document engineering manager, product manager, product marketing manager, right? So a lot of times
Yeah.
as a PM, you actually may be super interested in those metrics, but you just don't have access to them. It's not your
Right.
like, oh, your job is to translate specs to engineering. You're that PM, right? There's a PM that does the
Hmm.
marketing guys things. So I think that's right. Is elevating yourself in the C-suite in our companies, like that's a constant problem. Like I can tell you that in any of our portfolio companies, when you sit in a board meeting, the numbers, back office finance, all that stuff is pretty easy to go over. Most of our boards don't know how to really evaluate what engineering's telling them. Like, is it good? Is this bad? It's, trying to show velocity metrics or anything is largely useless, right? And so having, your product managers, your head of engineering able to collaborate well to say, look, this is what we did, and we think this is going to lead to this amount of revenue, and we're starting to see that build there, or, we put this fix in and it reduced customer support calls, by 50% last quarter. I mean, those are the kind of things that, and even when they're asked to do something, having a conversation about, where is this taking our product, where is it taking the business, I think is a good thing. It's not something they're used to doing, particularly at a large company. And I think the hardest thing for chief product officers and head of engineering to do with me in particular, like the guy who plays my role at a private equity firm, is they tend to be very I want to say overly polite or you know kind to any feedback you give them. You don't have to be. The quickest thing is to tell me to go F myself, right? Like my job is to
Yeah.
think of ideas, right? So you do want to understand as you get access to the board and the senior people at the private equity firm, like, I don't need to be massaged. Just tell me the good news, tell me the
Mhm.
bad news. Like we're good. Like I don't, you don't
Yeah.
need to. And if I said,
Direct communication is typically better, right?
yeah, and if I make a suggestion, my value is I can make a suggestion. You can't fire me because we own the company. But you should tell me that suggestion's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, right? And that's totally fine. You should feel comfortable doing that because half the time I'm saying it just to eliminate something. We all agree that's really stupid. So let's not spend any time on it. Or the best product engineering guys go, that was a really stupid idea. But you know what? It gave me an idea that's actually workable. And in private equity,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
all good. Like, I'm not here for the glory, my friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
As
Yeah.
they say. All right. Well, let's bring us home with, if you got a placement story, like a crazy placement story that taught you something, like a placement didn't work out, or the person ended up, like insanely crazy, or the company was insane. Like what, when you have your third, gin and tonic, and you're having a laugh, Sean, what's the story that comes back to you?
Yeah, boy, it's an interesting one. I'll give you a couple different things, very 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 different. This one example of a crazy experience, I wouldn't necessarily say it wasn't a placement in the end because you'll find out why, but it was a crazy experience. Was we This goes many years ago, and I was actually where it was before I began to focus entirely on technical leadership. If I remember correctly, it was like an SVP of sales search. So it was a sales search. We were working on a search for a client. We had a candidate who was a finalist. We were basically at offer stage, doing references. There was something, I can't remember what it was, but there was something in the references combined with some odd kind of behavior, and even the tone of some of the references, even though they were references that the candidate provided, that kind of spooked us a little bit. And so we started wondering what something here, right? Where there's smoke, there might be fire.
Sure. Yep.
And we started doing some additional poking around, and I forget how we finally got the information, but it turned out this individual, this he was a man, he was married, he had a family. In his prior company, he had been using company funds to rent an apartment down in Brazil, where he had a another significant other, a boyfriend, in fact, living in that apartment. And when he was traveling to Latin America, he was living there with this boyfriend, and that all came out through the referencing. And
Oh,
you just can't make this stuff up, right?
no.
So needless to say, he didn't get the job. That one's wouldn't say it's funny crazy, but it's certainly crazy, right?
Well, it's certainly crazy
So
that they
so
don't think that they wouldn't think it would come out. I mean, you're going to get caught
yeah,
at some point.
I've realized that as I've gotten older, I've realized that people just do incredibly stupid things for not great reasons. I don't quite know why, but anyway, that was an interesting one.
We've had the
In
similar,
terms of
the other end of it where there was a guy going, and he knew as part of the deal, he wasn't going to be the CTO when we bought the company. He'd been hired by the founder to fix a bunch of stuff, and he made a nice chunk on the exit. But the day we closed,
yeah.
we had to sort of walk him out, and there was a guy waiting for him in the parking lot, a process server. His wife divorced him the same day and cleaned out their house.
Oh,
Like,
jeez.
you talk about bad. Oh man, like
That's a tough day.
felt terrible. Like, oh yeah,
That's a rough day.
oh.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I've had some clients pass away. In fact, I just had, I mean, you do this business long enough, you have some weird experiences. I had a client who I just worked with about a year ago, and we were going to reach out to him just to check in and see how he was doing because he had another search that was potentially going to kick off, and his LinkedIn page was gone, just deleted. And he wasn't on the company's website. He was a senior guy. He was one of the C-suite guys at this company, and a little bit of poking around, and he died in a mountaineering accident up in Washington
Oh
just this
wow.
past June.
Oh, was
So
he
just
on that?
crazy
Was he on
stuff
that
like
big? He
that.
was on that big hike. There's a lot of people that freak snowstorm that trap people. There's a
This one was not, I think three guys got killed in this particular accident. I don't
huh.
think it was the same one, but it was well, mountaineering is clearly, given your story as well, clearly very dangerous. But I've had that happen a few times. The biggest learning I've had, probably, this isn't a crazy story, but anyone who's been in executive search long enough has had some, I call them the death march searches, right? And I had a search go on for over a year for a company. I'm not going to name names, but it's a company that is building an autonomous vehicle owned by Amazon. Give you enough there, but that search was a tough one, and we basically just scraped the market. We looked at every company that you would think would be right, a number of different categories, not even autonomous vehicles outside of that. And ultimately, I found our candidate at Disney, of all places, and he's a rock star. And the lesson I learned there was, don't always listen to your client. Usually do, but not always, because sometimes they will tell you certain things and that aren't correct, frankly, and you have to challenge their assumptions and push them. And in many cases, that ends up being the candidate who gets the job. And that was the case. Disney's an interesting company because this guy did have some startup experience in his past, and also, but Disney does really well in certain areas is marry the physical world with kind of the digital world,
Yep.
right? And they're one of the few companies that's done that really effectively. And so that was why this individual worked out. But um, grit and tenacity as well. Interestingly, some of our best references are the searches that have gone on the longest. It seems counterintuitive, but it's because they know we've sort of driven hard through a project that many search firms would have probably abandoned, 3 or 4 months in.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I don't know if you do the process the same way, but your process works for us, which is, you're doing some screening, I'm doing some screening, before we get into panel interviews, which I think is super effective. But I mean, I think that's one thing we've learned is, it's really hard because in a sense, I'm the customer, right?
yeah,
But you're basically going to tell me to pound sand because I'm going to be wrong, a lot of the time. And, I think that's hard for PE people, like, because they get used to being even our associates, because, they grow into a role where they're 25 years old talking to a CEO. And
yeah,
I'm not saying they talk down to him, but they're sort of talking at peer level. It's just that's the nature of the job to some
yeah,
degree, right?
right,
But it sometimes is great on a CEO. They're just not used to sort of, I don't know, taking orders from and it's the same thing on our side. It's like, if you're not comfortable pushing back, I'm going to make tons of bad decisions, and you're going to
sure.
find things in resumes that there's something about this guy you liked, and it's worth. And I think that was the hardest thing for us is let's be as open-minded as we can about the candidates because
Hmm.
we're just not going to get it right.
Yeah,
I mean, it's funny.
yep,
People forget that, right? It's like what the metaphor I always use is you're never going to beat a car salesman in negotiating for a car because that's all they do. That's their
yeah,
job, right?
that's right,
Like I'm not going
that's
to be
right.
able to find people or judge people at resume like you because you're seeing hundreds, thousands at a time. I haven't seen any of that stuff, right? But
Yeah.
you get into this role of, oh, I'm the PE partner, so therefore my opinion must be right. Now thankfully I'm married, so that gets handled right quick in my household. Sean, when I think I'm right, right
Yep, yep,
quick.
that's right.
Well,
Yeah, I
awesome.
think
So
that's right though. I mean, I think just listen, if you're gonna hire a retained search firm, listen to them, right? There's a balancing act there, of course, and a good firm will work with you on it. But you're paying them to get their thoughts and perspective. Obviously to find
Totally.
the right candidate, but along the way, take the input because it's typically pretty good. So
So if people want to get in touch with you personally or SPMB, how do they find you guys?
yeah, probably the best way. So our website, pretty straightforward. It's just www.spmb.com. That's simple. So S is in Schweichler, P is in Price, M is in Malarkey, B is in Barry.com. Yes, Malarkey. It's Dave Malarkey, who I've worked with for many years. Great guy. Funny enough, his wife refused to take his last name, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, that's Band of
But
Brothers, man. That's Band of Brothers.
yeah,
When David Schwimmer says,
that's right.
Malarkey is Irish, isn't it? Stands for bullshit.
Yeah, exactly
Okay.
right. So, but spmb.com. And then, to reach me personally, email is probably best. My email is simply Sean, that's Sean, Sean at spmb.com. And you can catch me there. You can catch me on LinkedIn as well. I get so many LinkedIn messages. I'm not as diligent about those. So email is probably best. So
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. This was great. I'm sure we're going to have another search coming up soon, as we always do. But we've had a good run this year for sure. We've had a couple of good processes already.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Jim, for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to continuing the relationship.
From the heart of Chicago to all over the globe, a couple private equity geniuses, they share what they know. They love to mess with technology where the future is sink or swim. It's the Private Equity Funcast with Devin and Jim. Technology issues and middle market PE-backed companies, they bicker with each other and they don't take themselves too seriously. It's not venture capital, it's private equity. It's the Private Equity Funcast. Pour yourself a drink and have a seat. It's the Private Equity Funcast. That equity is private. If PE excites you, let it show and do not hide it. Devin and Jim.